I wanted to make a video of my favorite Saturday night main event moments. Now, everyone's memories about this stuff is much different. I grew up in an era where Saturday night's main event was kind of like in its wheelhouse, replacing the reruns of Saturday Night Live and Dick Ebersol, a big part of bringing wrestling and WWE's glitz and glamour, and essentially what would be their biggest storylines heading into WrestleMania would peak on either Saturday night's main event or the Friday night show, just the main event. We're going to focus on Saturday night's main event here, and we'll do a countdown from 5 to 1. At number 5 of my most memorable / favorite Saturday night main event moments, we're going to go Evander Holyfield versus Matt. Just kidding. We're not doing anything from the 2000s era of Saturday night's main event when they brought it back some like 14 or 15 years later. But number 5 is from one that I don't think many people would have on their list, which is the January 27th, 1992 episode, which was their first Fox show when they moved over from NBC to Fox. NBC dropped them, and then they came back a few years later on Fox. And the reason why this one is on my list in this specific match is because it would be the first time the Nature Boy Ric Flair was ever on Saturday night's main event. So this aired February the 8th, so it aired about 10 days later. And this was the setup to WrestleMania 8. If you remember that storyline coming out of the Royal Rumble, it looked like we were getting Hogan and Ric Flair, but in turn, they were really setting up Hogan versus Sid Justice / Sid Vicious. And it was Hogan and Justice against Ric Flair and The Undertaker, Beefcake, and Mr. Perfect and Paul Bearer, all involved in this storyline from Lubbock, Texas. And honestly, the match itself is not all that memorable. It's the same sort of story that normally happened to Hogan former friends, where Sid Justice just doesn't like this dude anymore. Though I do think that they were a little heavy-handed and it wasn't as subtle with Sid Justice. Maybe he just wasn't that good of an actor, or maybe the fans kind of wanted it to happen because they're a little sick of Hogan at this point. But I just wanted to point out because for the first Fox show, it did feel like, oh, maybe they'll be able to rejuvenate this. I really miss this as a wrestling fan. I miss Saturday night's main event. And also the Nature Boy and The Undertaker on the same team, Hogan and Justice, the star power was through the roof, and the rating was pretty decent as well for their first show back. They didn't do very many of these, so that Fox soon did the same as NBC in canceling the show. But it was also the 30th edition of Saturday night's main event. So a lot of people feel like WrestleMania 8 was kind of the end of a really good run with WWE, and then they would transition to WrestleMania 9 through the Attitude Era, and then that's when it kind of gets big again. So this is kind of a little bit of a swan song for me and Saturday night's main event. So Hogan Justice beat Ric Flair and The Undertaker by disqualification. All right, number 4. Now this is memorable, and you're going to sense a theme here because all of these have to do with Hulk Hogan angles and Hulk Hogan matches, because he was the big deal. I think he was wrestling probably in like 90% of these shows. And Hulk Hogan beats the Big Boss Man in a cage match that was it was airing on May 27th, 1989. So I'm about to turn 13 very soon. But it was actually taped on April 25th. So they taped this thing a whole month out before, and it comes right off of WrestleMania 5. Hogan and Savage with the Mega Powers. And the memorable thing about this is there is a superplex spot from the cage with Hogan and Bossman. Now, it wasn't a dynamic superplex. It wasn't a poetry in motion or a Barry Windham like powerful superplex. Just the mere fact that Hulk Hogan was not at the top of the cage, but he was kind of cinched it into the cage, and Big Boss Man, who's 350 pounds probably at this point, that they both just decided to do this spot, which was tremendous. And I remember my next door neighbor who, even as a little kid, I was kind of interested in the casual fan and what the casual fan would think. And he was the casual of casual fans. He was a Hogan guy. His wife was a Warrior. She was a big fan of the Warrior. So I'd watch these shows knowing what I knew, even at 13, and then kind of through their eyes about, what was kind of capturing the casual fan. And I just remember we're watching this match, and maybe I don't even know if I'd watched it live with him, but it was definitely on. We'd seen a clip or something, and when he got excited for something, he would go wham. And so, as you think about how a superplex works, we see it coming, which is part of the excitement. And then it's almost like, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to do this? Are they really going to do this? And then they're in motion. So there's this anticipation. And he started as they're falling, and then they hit it, and he does the wham like that. Moments like that were so memorable. So that's number 4. Okay, let's go to number 3. Now, this is the most memorable one for me. It is Hogan and Don Morocco in a match where, if you sort of understood wrestling back then, you're like, oh, angle alert. They played a video of like Mr. Fuji being sick and Bobby the Brain Heenan replaces him. And at that point, you're like, something's going to happen. As a kid, I'm like 9 years old here. But this is the angle that hooked me pretty much for life. Now, I had seen Hogan beforehand. Rocky 3 is kind of what makes me aware of pro wrestling. And then I'm catching things here and there in 85, some stuff on TBS to the Road Warriors. And you're like, oh, wow, these guys look different. And I very vividly remember them. But Hogan in 85 as well, Cyndi Lauper, all that stuff, Mr. T, it all worked on me. But it wasn't until this angle where I was like, okay, I need to start paying attention every week. So it's Hogan and Morocco, and then King Kong Bundy comes in, and they do quite the job on Hulk Hogan to set up WrestleMania 2. It's avalanches, it's big splashes, and it's Hulk Hogan convulsing on the stretcher. And fast forward a little bit, it's send your letters to Hulk Hogan, which thankfully I did not do. Even at 9, I kind of figured it was a little pointless. But that was February 15th, and I think it only aired like a couple days later from Phoenix. So that is number 3. Number 2 is the Mega Powers joining together to be the tag team, the glue being Miss Elizabeth. And you could see the inklings of the union coming together. This is not the exploding that would come later, and that would be on Friday night's main event, so I'm not counting that here. But September 23rd, 1987, from Hershey, Pennsylvania, the Mega Powers get together. Now, this thing works because it crosses over about a year and a half, and all the tentpole shows, something would happen with them. You go to the Survivor Series, then you go to the Royal Rumble, then you go to WrestleMania. Hogan helps Savage win. Then you go to SummerSlam. Then you go to Survivor Series again. And so all this stuff is building up, and the blow off happens on Friday night's main event before WrestleMania 5. The handshake was goofy, but it was like the two cool guys in WWF coming together and uniting as one. Okay, a couple of other just little trivia notes. Uncle Elmer's wedding was very memorable, but rewatching it back, it is not great television. Also, the Real American video and the Piledriver video debut on Saturday night's main event. And the very first match, the U.S. Express and Ricky Steamboat. So you're talking about Barry Windham on the very opening match of Saturday night's main event. Defeat Nikolai Volkov, the Iron Sheik, and George the Animal Steel, who's a heel on the very first Saturday night's main event. Okay, so the top match moment of all time to me, because of where my fandom was, I'm still 10 years old. Hogan beats Orndorf by escaping the cage. They actually both go over the top. They hit the floor at the same time. Joey Marella, Danny Davis, they're arguing. Davis pushes Marella. They both declare each person the winner. It's declared a tie. Vince says, well, you can't have a tie in a cage match. So they go back in the ring and they redo it. And I just remember the one line where early in the match, Jesse goes, if Mr. Wonderful was bald, he'd be the champion right now. Because Mr. Wonderful was halfway down the cage and Hogan grabbed him by his hair to pull him back in. So for me, for 10-year-old me, that moment, Hogan Orndorf, the big feud, this was like the real payoff to that big feud. You got to see it on Saturday night's main event. Hogan wins. Orndorf was another one of his great competitors. I mentioned Savage and Funk. Orndorf is right there as like the best person to go up against Hogan. All right, before we get out of here, I wanted to read off some memorable moments from other folks in the Discord when I asked them. From EarthDog7900. EarthDog said it's Randy Savage versus Bret Hart in their one match that I feel like for the old school people who were into the work rate, that was like a favorite moment. And then all of a sudden, post when that match even happened, it was like, oh, we got to find this match, this old Saturday Night's main event match. It was one of the better actual wrestling matches in Saturday Night's main events history. From Graps Knowledge, he's kind of cheating a little bit because he did Friday night's main event, which is the Buster Douglas knocking out Randy Savage, which was originally supposed to be Iron Mike Tyson as the special guest referee between Hogan and Savage. And I remember when Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, in one sense, I was like, oh my gosh, Mike Tyson lost. But in the other sense, I was like, wait, is Buster Douglas now going to be the referee? And they made it work, and Buster Douglas was the referee for that match, though I think, at least maybe to Vince, like the thought was Hogan against Mike Tyson was a possibility, and of course didn't happen. Paul Fontaine says it's a toss-up between this clip and the breakup 18 months later. So the same thing. Mega Powers was his favorite moment. John E. Capcom says Macho Man and Jake Roberts match was his favorite. Larry Stenshine, he said the same one, which was number 3 for me, but really the most memorable moment for me was Bundy squashing Hulk Hogan. And then Jason Hagholm, who was not even alive, also mentions the Hogan and Boss Man, the big blue cage. That was his favorite moment. And I think that is it. So that's my top 5 memorable moments. And hopefully with Saturday night's main event back, we will get more memorable moments.